The night the stars went silent, a strange message was sent from the future, warning us of a hidden force beneath the Earth's surface, one that could change everything. As the shadows of the past and future intertwine, we are left to wonder, are we already too late to stop it? The night was warm, and the air carried a faint, earthy scent from the surrounding woods. A small group of friends had gathered around a crackling campfire in the clearing, the shadows of trees dancing against the flames. The heat from the fire was comforting, but there was a tension in the air, an unspoken feeling that tonight was different. Something had drawn them together, and it wasn't just the stars above or the cool, peaceful silence of the wilderness. It was the whispers, the stories that had been circulating in town for weeks. "There's something out there," Sam said, his voice low, almost reluctant. He was the first to speak, his eyes darting toward the edge of the woods, where the darkness seemed to swallow everything. "The lights, they aren't just stars." The others fell silent. They'd all heard about the strange lights appearing in the sky at night, but Sam was the first to admit he'd seen them firsthand. He took a deep breath, settling into his spot by the fire, his face flickering in the orange glow. "It was a week ago," he began, his words slow, measured. "I was out walking along the river when I saw them. Bright, white lights, more than one, moving like they were following some kind of pattern. It was impossible to ignore." The others leaned in, their eyes wide with curiosity. "I thought it was just a plane at first," Sam continued. "But these lights, they were too fast. They darted, stopped, moved again. No plane moves like that. I watched them for a while, and then it happened. They landed just outside town, in the fields behind the old mill. The campfire crackled, the only sound in the still night. I went to see. I had to," Sam said, his voice tinged with both fear and excitement. "And when I got there, the field was empty. No lights, no sign of anything, just a quiet, still night. But then I found something, glowing footprints, barely visible, but they were there, leading off into the trees." The fire popped, sending a brief spray of embers into the night air. "They weren't like anything I've ever seen. The glow was cold, like it was coming from beneath the ground, not just on top of it. I followed them, but they just stopped, like whatever had made them had vanished. I don't know what to think, but I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is watching us." The others sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Sam's words settling in. They all knew something strange had been happening in their town, but now it felt real. The lights in the sky, the strange footprints. It was more than just rumors. "So, what do you think it was?" Jenny asked, her voice trembling just slightly. Sam looked into the fire, as if seeking an answer within the flames. "I think we're not alone." The wilderness was thick with shadows that night, the tall trees standing like silent sentinels in the dark. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend escape, just a few friends trekking through the forest, far from the hum of the town. The night was cool, and the only sounds were the crackling of the campfire and the occasional rustle of leaves. But there was something off, something lingering in the air that none of them could quite place. "It's too quiet tonight," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper as he stirred the fire. The others nodded, their eyes scanning the tree line, where the darkness seemed unnaturally deep. Even the crickets were silent, leaving an unsettling stillness that pressed in on them. They'd been out here for 3 days now, and though they'd heard the usual sounds of the forest, tonight was different. Strange noises echoed from the trees, snaps of branches, and the faintest rustle of movement that didn't quite match any of the usual forest creatures. At first, they shrugged it off as nothing more than the wind or an overactive imagination, but the sounds persisted, each time closer than before. "Did you hear that?" Sarah's voice cut through the quiet, her eyes wide as she stared into the darkness. The others fell silent, straining to listen. For a moment, Nothing. Then, faintly, the sound came again, a soft, crunching noise, like footsteps in the underbrush, too deliberate to be an animal. "I'm not imagining that," Tom muttered, his hand gripping his flashlight. The beam of light flicked nervously between the trees, but it revealed nothing but shadows. "Maybe it's just a deer or something," Mark suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But then, it came. A figure emerged from the trees, tall and slender, barely visible against the backdrop of the night. Its movements were unnervingly smooth, as though it floated rather than walked. The flashlight beam caught it briefly, illuminating a pale face with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. The figure didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching them. No one moved, not even to breathe. The figure seemed to be studying them, its gaze cold and emotionless. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished back into the trees, leaving only the lingering sense of something wrong. What the hell was that? Sarah's voice trembled as she slowly backed away from the trees, her eyes darting nervously around the camp. "I don't know," Tom replied, his heart racing. "But I think we're not alone out here." The sounds in the woods grew louder, now accompanied by a low hum, like a distant engine, vibrating through the ground. It was impossible to tell where it came from, but it was everywhere. And with it, a growing realization settled over them that whatever had been watching them in the woods wasn't human. They weren't just camping in the forest anymore. They were being hunted. But by who or what? The fire crackled and popped, the flames dancing in the night air as the group sat around it, eyes fixed on Jason, whose voice had dropped to a low, haunting whisper. It was his turn to speak, and they all knew this was no ordinary story. His face, usually filled with a confident grin, was now tense, his eyes distant, as if he were reliving a memory he could never fully escape. "I don't talk about this much," Jason began, his voice thick with hesitation. "But you guys asked, and, well, maybe it's time." He swallowed hard, staring into the fire, then began again, his words coming slower now. "It was late, around midnight, when it happened. I remember the stars above, clearer than I'd ever seen them before. I was out in the field behind my house, just looking up, not a sound around except for the occasional breeze. Then, it just changed. The air grew thick, like it was charged with something I couldn't quite explain." Jason paused, his fingers curling around the edge of his jacket sleeve. "I remember hearing this low hum, like a vibration coming from the ground, but also from the sky. The stars, they weren't right. They started to shift, moving in a way that didn't make sense. And then the light. It was so bright, blinding. It came from above, cutting through the night like a blade. I couldn't look away, but I couldn't move either." A shiver ran down his spine as he continued, voice faltering. "Next thing I knew, I wasn't on the ground anymore. I was in something. A ship, I guess. But it didn't look like any kind of ship I'd ever seen. It was this smooth, silver thing, like it had no edges, no seams. Everything inside was soft and glowing, not like anything in this world. And there were these beings, tall and thin, but they didn't look human. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their eyes, God, their eyes, huge, black, and they just stared at me, no expression. I don't remember them speaking, but somehow I understood them, you know? It's like their thoughts went right into my head." The group was silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Jason looked up, his eyes clouded with a mix of fear and confusion. "They did something to me. I don't remember it all, but I remember the feeling, the way they probed, I guess, for lack of a better word. And their technology, it was beyond anything I could comprehend. Machines that didn't make sense, that worked without touching them, without wires. And the worst part? They took something. They took something from me. I don't know what it was, but I know it's still gone, and that's what's been haunting me ever since." Jason's voice trembled, the last words barely a whisper. When I woke up, I was back in the field. The light was gone, but it felt like no time had passed at all. Like I was just gone for a moment. But something changed. The memories started to surface in pieces, and they're still coming. Every night I close my eyes, I can feel them watching. I can feel them waiting. The fire flickered, casting long shadows as Jason's eyes met theirs. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if they're still out there, but I know what I felt and what they did. And now, I wonder, are they still watching? The fire crackled loudly as the group sat in a tight circle, the warmth of the flames offering little comfort against the chill creeping through the trees. There had been an uneasy tension in the air ever since they'd set up camp, something that none of them could explain. It was as though the forest itself was watching them, waiting. The rustling of leaves seemed louder than it should be, and every crack of a branch felt like a whisper from the shadows. Anyone else hear that? Sarah's voice broke the silence, her eyes darting around the darkened woods. No one replied immediately, but the unease in the air was palpable. The hairs on the back of their necks stood at attention, a strange sensation that they couldn't shake, like invisible eyes were fixed on them from all directions. Mike was the first to speak. Last night, I swear I saw something. It was barely a shadow, moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks, but then I saw it again. It didn't make a sound. It was like it wasn't even there, until it was. Like something watching us. The others shifted uncomfortably, the firelight dancing in their eyes, casting long, flickering shadows on their faces. As Mike continued, his voice low, his words grew heavier with the weight of his experience. I thought it was just a deer or something, but I kept looking around and nothing. No animal, no movement, just the quiet, and then that shadow, sliding between the trees like it knew I was watching. Sarah looked around, her face pale. I thought I was the only one who noticed. Earlier today, I saw something too. A light, high in the trees, bright, almost like it was shining from behind the branches. But when I looked away, it was gone. I vanished. Same thing happened to me. Ben chimed in, his voice hoarse, as if the memory had unsettled him. I was walking by the stream when I saw a flash of light, right in front of me. I thought maybe someone had a flashlight, but it was too high up, too bright, and it disappeared before I could even think about calling out. As each of them shared their experiences, the stories began to blend into one overwhelming truth. They all had seen something that couldn't be explained. The lights, the shadows, the strange feeling that they were never alone. They had all felt it, a silent presence that lingered in the corners of their vision, in the spaces between the trees, watching, waiting. I don't think we're alone here, Sarah finally whispered, the weight of the words sinking into the group like a stone dropped into deep water. Ben nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. It's like something's been here before us. Like we're intruders, but it's still here, still watching us. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and the shadows around them seemed to grow longer, darker. No one spoke for a moment. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, but the feeling in the air was different now, heavier. It wasn't just the trees whispering. It was something else, something unseen. The fire had long since dwindled to a soft glow when Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves might escape her if she didn't say them quietly enough. She had been listening to the stories all night, her eyes darting nervously between the flickering flames and the shadows of the forest that seemed to grow darker the longer they sat. But now, it was her turn. She had been holding this one back for too long. It started a few weeks ago, Emily began, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her mug. At first, I thought it was just a weird dream, you know? I've had my fair share of strange ones, but then it kept happening. Night after night, the same dream, always the same. She paused, letting the others lean in a little closer, sensing the change in her tone. In the dream, I'm standing in this dark, empty space. It's not quite the sky, but it's not solid either. It's like I'm floating between two worlds. And then, these symbols start to appear around me, mathematical equations. Patterns I don't understand. It's like they're being written in the air, but they're not just symbols. They feel alive, like they're moving, shifting. She swallowed hard, her eyes narrowing as if trying to focus on something only she could see. It's like they're talking to me, but not in words. It's as if my mind just knows what they mean. The group was quiet, watching her carefully. Emily wasn't the type to make things up. They all knew her well enough to sense when something was different, something beyond her usual stories. It was all strange, but it didn't scare me, not at first. But then, the last time I had the dream, there was something else. A voice. No, not a voice. More like a feeling. Like a vibration inside my head. It told me that something was coming. Something big. And I understood that it wasn't just for me. It was for everyone. For the whole planet. A chill ran through the group. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the weight of her words hanging heavy between them. They said the symbols were a warning. A countdown, maybe. I'm not sure. But the dream felt real, like it was reaching through to the waking world, telling me I had to prepare, to understand something. Emily paused again, her eyes searching the fire, the words now tangled in her mind. I don't know what it means. I don't even know if it's just my mind playing tricks or if it's something else. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm supposed to do something about it. There was a long silence as the fire popped and crackled in the night air. The others exchanged glances, the gravity of what Emily had just said sinking in. Was this just another strange coincidence? Or was something truly reaching out, trying to make contact? For the first time that night, the forest felt eerily still. No rustling in the trees. No sounds of the wind. Only the crackling of the fire, as if the world itself was waiting for an answer. The fire flickered, casting long shadows that danced against the trees, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier as Mark began his story. He was an astronaut, one of the few who had been out there, among the stars, beyond what most of them could imagine. They all turned toward him, waiting, as he leaned forward, the firelight catching the hard edge of his jaw. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, Mark began, his voice low, almost distant. Just another mission. Our crew was tasked with charting a new sector, checking out a planet that was considered, well, a dead rock. But when we got there, something was off. He paused, his eyes scanning the fire, as if trying to find the right words. We were orbiting this planet, not too far from the edge of the galaxy. It looked like any other dust, barren, no signs of life. The scanners didn't pick up anything unusual. But as we got closer, we saw it ruins. Mark's gaze flickered to the stars overhead, as if the memory still haunted him. Ancient structures, unlike anything we had ever seen. Towering spires, broken arches, huge remnants of cities. And the most unsettling part? It was all in perfect condition, as if it had never been touched by time. Not a single sign of decay, not even a bit of rust. It was like the planet had frozen in time. The group sat motionless, hanging on his every word. Curiosity got the better of us, and we landed. The atmosphere was breathable barely, but we suited up, of course. What we found on the surface was beyond what we had ever prepared for. There were carvings, glyphs, and symbols etched into the stones. Some of them looked familiar, but others, they were like nothing we had seen. Complex designs, geometric shapes, patterns that didn't follow any kind of natural order. He took a deep breath, his fingers twitching as he recalled the next part. The most disturbing thing was the silence. No wind, no sounds of any kind. It was like the whole planet was holding its breath. But the strangest part? We found a city, well, what we thought was a city. It was enormous, stretching across miles, but the strange thing was that there was no sign of life. No bodies, no animals, not even dust, just emptiness. Mark's voice dropped to a whisper now. We dug deeper. We started uncovering equipment machines that didn't belong. Technology that was beyond anything we had on Earth, more advanced than anything we had ever seen. But none of it worked. Not a single device powered on. It was like the planet had been abandoned, left frozen in its prime, as if whatever happened wiped it clean. There was a long silence after Mark finished speaking, the crackling of the fire, the only sound in the air. His eyes were dark, haunted by what he had seen. "And that's when we found it," he said softly, the words almost lost in the wind. "A recording, just a brief message. But in it, we heard a voice. A warning, in a language we couldn't understand. The last thing the message said was this: 'Do not linger.' And before we could figure out what that meant, we had to leave. The planet started to feel wrong. Like we weren't meant to be there. It was as if something was watching us. The fire crackled again, but no one spoke. The idea of an abandoned world, a forgotten civilization, and whatever might still be there, was enough to make the entire forest feel unnaturally still. It was as if, somewhere far away, the echoes of that lost planet were still waiting to be uncovered. The flames crackled softly, casting fleeting shadows on the faces gathered around the campfire. Sarah, who had been quietly listening, took a deep breath before leaning forward, her voice carrying a chilling weight. "You want to hear about an invasion that never happened?" she asked, her eyes flickering with a kind of knowing sadness. The group nodded, leaning in, curious about what she would say. Sarah had a quiet intensity to her, a presence that suggested she had seen things most of them could barely imagine. "It started in the late 70s, she began, her gaze far off, as if recalling something distant. There were reports, strange sightings, unusual ships in the sky. People thought it was just another UFO wave. But then, things escalated quickly. Military personnel began to report seeing something not quite human. Figures moving in the shadows, technology that didn't match anything we had. At first, the government kept it all under wraps. No one was supposed to know." Her voice lowered, almost a whisper. But there was a group of scientists who couldn't ignore what was happening. They started connecting the dots. People who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, those were the first to disappear. Disappeared without a trace. No records, nothing to explain it. And then, one night, the ships came, several of them, descending on a remote part of the country, near an old military base. It wasn't an invasion, at least, not in the way we think. It was more like they were preparing something. The fire flickered, and Sarah paused. The weight of her words seemed to hang in the air. She glanced around, checking the faces in the circle. "What did they want?" Mark asked, leaning forward. She looked at him, her eyes hardening. "They wanted something from us. Our genetic material, I think. But they weren't interested in taking it by force. No, it was more subtle than that. They had ways to manipulate the mind, to control people, to get them to give up what they wanted without even realizing it." She shuddered, rubbing her arms. And the government? They knew. They knew, and they acted quickly. They rounded up the people who had seen them. They erased evidence, wiped photographs, documents, anything that could link back to the truth. The military stepped in, and the invasion was stopped. It wasn't even about fighting back. It was about hiding everything. It was as if they didn't want us to know that the aliens had ever been here. Her eyes darkened as she continued. The ships never returned. The alien presence, at least the visible part, was gone. But there's something I've always wondered. Why didn't they come back? If they were so interested in us, why didn't they finish what they started? Was it a test? Were we just too much trouble? I don't know. But what I do know is that the government doesn't want us to ask those questions. They buried the whole thing. And the people who could have told the truth, they were silenced. There was a long pause, the only sound being the crackle of the fire. No one spoke as the weight of Sarah's story settled over them, leaving an eerie silence that hung in the air like an unanswered question. What had really happened? And why had it been covered up so thoroughly? The night air was cool and crisp as the group huddled around the fire, the flames dancing in the dark. The stories so far had been strange, unsettling, but none quite as otherworldly as the one they were about to hear. It came from old Bill, a man whose age was visible in every crease of his face, but whose eyes still held the fire of someone who had seen things beyond understanding. He sat back, his voice low but steady as he began. "It was many years ago," he started, his hands trembling slightly as he took a long pull from his flask. "I wasn't always this old. Back then, I was just a young man, still figuring out what life meant. I lived out in the country, in a little shack near the hills. Quiet place, perfect for getting lost in your thoughts. But one night, I got lost in something much bigger than myself." The fire crackled as the group leaned in. "It was late, just after midnight," Bill continued. "I'd stepped out to take a breath of fresh air when I saw a light. Not a plane, not a star. It was different. It hovered above the trees, silent. I thought it was some kind of strange weather phenomenon at first. But then, it landed, just like that. A ball of light, hovering, then gently lowering itself to the ground." He paused, his eyes now scanning the faces around him, as if recalling the moment again. Out of the light came a figure. I'll never forget it. It wasn't like us. It was tall, yes, but it didn't have a shape like ours. It shimmered, like light bending in water. And when it spoke, its voice wasn't words, but something deeper felt more than heard, like it was inside your head. The firelight flickered in the soft night breeze as Bill leaned forward. The traveler, as I'll call it, told me it came from a distant star system, far beyond our reach. It spoke of worlds where beings lived in harmony, not just with each other, but with the very fabric of space itself. These beings, they were made of light, pure, untainted. They traveled the universe, not by ships, but by thought. And they watched, not to conquer, but to understand. The group was entranced, hanging on every word, as Bill went on. It told me of civilizations older than anything we could imagine. Cities built on planets that didn't even exist in our galaxy. But it wasn't just stories. The traveler left something with me, something tangible, a small piece of its technology. A device, no bigger than my palm, glowing with a strange, gentle light. It felt alive. Bill's voice faltered slightly as he continued. The traveler told me I could never show it to anyone, that it would be safer in my hands. It gave me a warning, too. That humanity was at a crossroads, and that our future depended on how we chose to use knowledge we didn't yet understand. He leaned back, his gaze distant. I've kept that piece of technology hidden all these years. No one knows about it, no one except for me. And the traveler, I never saw it again. It just vanished, like it had never been there. But every now and then, I feel it. The device. It hums softly, like it's waiting for something, waiting for us. There was silence as old Bill's words settled over the campfire circle, leaving behind a deep, unspoken question in the air. Had he really met a being from another world? And if so, what was the traveler's true purpose? The fire crackled softly, the flickering light casting long shadows over the circle. The air had grown thick with anticipation as the group leaned in, waiting for the next story to unfold. Lisa, a woman whose face was etched with both strength and vulnerability, spoke up. Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying weight to it, a gravity that drew everyone's attention. I've kept this to myself for most of my life, she began, her gaze steady. But I think it's time you all hear the truth. I'm not like you. I wasn't born the way you were. I was created." The group exchanged glances, unsure of what she meant. She seemed so normal, so human. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something otherworldly, that made them listen closely. "I wasn't adopted," she continued, her voice growing firmer as she spoke. "I wasn't a mistake or some tragic story. I was made, part human, part something else. I don't know who or what those things were, but they came to my parents long before I was born. They offered them a deal, something they couldn't refuse, and that's how I came into the world." A hushed silence hung in the air as Lisa paused, the fire casting an eerie glow on her face. She seemed to be searching for the right words, or maybe still grappling with the weight of the truth. "I wasn't raised in a normal family," she said, her eyes lowering for a moment before meeting the gaze of each person around the fire. "I was raised to look like a human, to blend in, but there were things about me that never quite fit. When I was young, I noticed I had abilities, things that no one could explain, things that should have been impossible." The group was transfixed, some leaning forward, others barely breathing. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes flickering to the fire before she continued. "I could heal faster than anyone should. I could feel things, emotions, energy, things that weren't my own. I could see things in ways that didn't make sense. But it wasn't just me. There are others like me. We're scattered, living in plain sight. Some of us don't even know what we are, but we're out there. And we're not the only ones." The fire popped, sending a brief shower of sparks into the air. Lisa's voice grew softer, more contemplative. "The people who created us, they never told us everything. But I know this. We weren't just an experiment. We were part of something bigger, something the world isn't ready for." The group sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. It was hard to believe, yet there was something in her eyes, in the way she spoke, that made them wonder. Were there others like her living among them, hidden in plain sight? And if so, what did that mean for the world they thought they knew? Lisa's story left more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The mystery of who or what she really was only just beginning to unfold. The fire crackled softly, the flickering light casting long shadows over the circle. The air had grown thick with anticipation as the group leaned in, waiting for the next story to unfold. Lisa, a woman whose face was etched with both strength and vulnerability, spoke up. Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying weight to it, a gravity that drew everyone's attention. "I've kept this to myself for most of my life," she began, her gaze steady. "But I think it's time you all hear the truth. I'm not like you. I wasn't born the way you were. I was created." The group exchanged glances, unsure of what she meant. She seemed so normal, so human. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something otherworldly that made them listen closely. "I wasn't adopted," she continued, her voice growing firmer as she spoke. "I wasn't a mistake or some tragic story. I was made, part human, part something else. I don't know who or what those things were, but they came to my parents long before I was born. They offered them a deal, something they couldn't refuse, and that's how I came into the world." A hushed silence hung in the air as Lisa paused, the fire casting an eerie glow on her face. She seemed to be searching for the right words, or maybe still grappling with the weight of the truth. "I wasn't raised in a normal family," she said, her eyes lowering for a moment before meeting the gaze of each person around the fire. "I was raised to look like a human, to blend in. But there were things about me that never quite fit. When I was young, I noticed I had abilities, things that no one could explain, things that should have been impossible." The group was transfixed, some leaning forward, others barely breathing. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes flickering to the fire before she continued. "I could heal faster than anyone should. I could feel things, emotions, energy, things that weren't my own. I could see things in ways that didn't make sense. But it wasn't just me. There are others like me. We're scattered, living in plain sight. Some of us don't even know what we are, but we're out there, and we're not the only ones. The fire popped, sending a brief shower of sparks into the air. Lisa's voice grew softer, more contemplative. The people who created us, they never told us everything. But I know this. We weren't just an experiment. We were part of something bigger, something the world isn't ready for. The group sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. It was hard to believe, yet there was something in her eyes, in the way she spoke, that made them wonder. Were there others like her living among them, hidden in plain sight? And if so, what did that mean for the world they thought they knew? Lisa's story left more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. The mystery of who or what she really was only just beginning to unfold. The air was thick with silence as the fire crackled, its warm glow flickering in the night. The group sat around it, their faces lit by the dancing flames, waiting for the next tale. Martin, an older man whose eyes seemed to carry the weight of years, lived and secrets kept, leaned forward. His voice was soft at first, but the gravity of his words pulled everyone in. It started one summer, he began, his eyes focused on the flames, as though reliving the memory. There was this light. At first, it seemed like nothing more than an odd star in the sky, but then it didn't behave like anything we'd ever seen before. The others were quiet, listening intently, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. It stayed there for nights, Martin continued, just hanging in the sky, glowing, pulsing. It was brighter than any star, but it didn't move. It didn't flicker. Every night, it would be there, right above the town, as if it was watching us. A few of the listeners exchanged uneasy glances. There was something unnerving about the way he spoke, so calm, yet so deliberate, as if the memory still haunted him. For weeks, it was the same. Martin went on, his voice lowering. And then, one night, it changed. The light. It started to shine, a beam down, right into the town square. It wasn't like any light I've ever seen. It was almost alive, in a way. It moved, it pulsed, and then it took him. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air. The fire crackled, but the night felt unnervingly still. Everyone sat motionless, waiting for him to continue. It was Sam. He was the first to disappear. No one saw him go, just a beam of light, and then nothing. He was gone, just like that. For days, no one knew where he'd gone or what had happened. And then, just as suddenly as he vanished, he came back. A chill ran through the circle as Martin's eyes shifted to meet each of theirs, his voice heavy with the truth he was about to reveal. When he returned, it wasn't the same Sam. He had changed. He was different. His eyes, there was something in them, something that wasn't there before. He told us he had been taken to another world, not just in space, but somewhere beyond it. He said he'd been shown things, worlds, civilizations, histories that we couldn't begin to comprehend. And the message he brought back was for all of us. The fire seemed to dim slightly as the words hung in the air. Martin's voice grew quiet, but his words were clearer now, the truth coming through with chilling precision. He said we were on the edge, that humanity had reached a point where we had to choose whether to continue on our path or face the consequences of ignoring what had been shown to us. And the light that stayed, it wasn't just a beacon, it was a warning. The group sat in stunned silence, the weight of his story settling in. What had Sam seen? And why had the light chosen to stay? The answer felt just out of reach, leaving the fire's glow to flicker uncertainly in the deepening night. The wind howled outside the expedition's makeshift shelter, its icy breath clawing at the walls of the small, reinforced tent. The team had been in Antarctica for weeks, battling the cold and the isolation, searching for something that could explain the strange readings they had been receiving from their equipment. But what they found beneath the ice was far beyond anything they could have imagined. Dr. Olivia Carson, the lead scientist, was the first to notice it. The seismic readings had spiked, the ground beneath their feet vibrating with a low hum that felt unnatural. At first, they thought it was just another anomaly, something to add to the list of unexplained occurrences in this frozen wasteland. But then, the ground cracked, a deep rift opening up in the ice, revealing a dark, yawning abyss. "Over here," Olivia shouted to her team, the excitement in her voice barely contained. "You need to see this." One by one, the explorers gathered around her, their breath visible in the freezing air, eyes wide as they peered into the chasm. What lay beneath the surface wasn't just a cavern, it was a city, an entire city, hidden beneath layers of ice and snow, perfectly preserved, as though time had frozen it in place. Ancient stone structures, covered in strange symbols and intricate carvings, rose up from the depths. Towers stretched impossibly high, their surfaces smooth and untouched by the elements. The team descended carefully, their steps tentative, unsure of what they were about to uncover. As they explored the vast, underground labyrinth, the sense of awe grew with every turn. The walls were lined with metals that shimmered in ways they couldn't explain, materials that didn't belong to any known earthly civilization. And there were the artifacts, glowing orbs, crystalline devices that seemed to hum with a strange energy, and fragments of what appeared to be machines unlike any they had seen before. But the strangest discovery came when they reached the central chamber. A massive platform stood at the heart of the city, surrounded by alien inscriptions and geometric designs. It was a structure unlike any they had encountered, with an air of power that radiated from it. And beneath the platform, hidden in the shadows, they found something that made their blood run cold. A series of perfectly preserved bodies, humanoid in shape but with features that were unmistakably alien. Olivia's heart raced as she studied the remains. The creatures, if that's what they were, had elongated limbs, their faces angular and their eyes large, reflecting an intelligence that seemed to peer into the very soul. Their presence, though lifeless, seemed to fill the chamber with an unspoken warning. Then, as the team gathered around the bodies, a sound echoed through the air. A low, vibrating hum, almost like a heartbeat. It was coming from the platform, growing louder with every passing second. They weren't alone. The realization hit them like a shockwave. The city wasn't just an ancient relic. It was a place of power, a place that still thrummed with life, with an energy that had been dormant for millennia. The explorers exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that whatever secrets this city held, they were not meant to be uncovered. But the truth was now undeniable. This was not a forgotten piece of history. It was a warning, a message from a race that had once lived on Earth, and now, it seemed, was calling them home. The desert stretched out for miles, an endless sea of sand and heat beneath the scorching sun. The small town of Terrell, isolated and quiet, had never seen anything like the events that were about to unfold. It was the kind of place where nothing much happened. People came, people went, and the town lived in the slow rhythm of everyday life. But that night, the rhythm was shattered. It started with a low hum in the distance, barely audible at first, like a distant engine idling in the heat. It grew louder, steadily approaching. At first, no one thought much of it, perhaps a military aircraft, or maybe a test flight from one of the nearby bases. But then, the sky above them began to change. A series of lights, bright and impossibly still, appeared, hovering in a perfect formation. The lights were not like anything the townspeople had ever seen before. They were too bright, too organized, almost as if they were calling attention to themselves. For a moment, the entire town held its breath, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Then, without warning, the lights grew larger, pulling closer, descending slowly from the sky. The shape of the object became clearer. An enormous craft, metallic and smooth, unlike anything built by humans. It was circular, with a series of glowing symbols etched along the surface, shifting and pulsating like a message, but one that no one could decipher. As the craft touched down in the desert, it was eerily silent. There were no explosions, no blasts of heat or wind to disturb the quiet night. It simply landed, as if the very desert was meant to hold it. The witnesses, farmers, truckers, and a few curious locals watched in stunned silence as the craft settled on the earth, its lights now casting strange shadows on the sand. The desert night was alive with an unnatural stillness. Then, from the craft, figures began to emerge. Tall, thin beings, their skin a pale, translucent blue, stood motionless at the edge of the ship. Their eyes were large, dark, and unblinking. They seemed to observe the crowd, as though waiting for something. The townspeople were frozen in place, unsure of whether to run or stay. The figures moved with an eerie grace, their footsteps leaving no trace in the sand. The air around them seemed to shimmer, as though it was bending to their presence. The beings didn't speak, they didn't gesture. They simply stood, and yet their presence spoke volumes. As the minutes passed, something else began to happen. The craft itself seemed to pulse, sending waves of energy outwards. It was as if the very air around it was alive, vibrating with strange energy. The witnesses reported hearing odd sounds, soft, melodic tones that resonated deep within their chests. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the craft lifted off, shooting back into the sky with a speed that defied explanation. It left behind no trace, no mark in the sand, and only a few witnesses were left behind, shaken and confused. The event was covered up almost immediately by authorities, but the rumors, stories of what the beings had looked like, of the strange technology they had seen, spread like wildfire. To this day, the residents of Terrell are divided on what they witnessed that night. Were the beings friends, visiting from a distant world, or were they something far more sinister? The truth, it seemed, would remain locked in the desert sands, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. It was during a quiet night that Clara first felt the pull, the unmistakable tug at the edge of her consciousness, a whisper in her mind that didn't belong to her. She'd been ill for months, the doctors unable to find any clear answers. It was during one of her worst bouts, a moment when she felt herself slipping away from the physical world, that the encounter began. She remembers everything vividly, as though it was both a dream and an awakening, a transition from one reality to another. Her body seemed to vanish, her heartbeat slowing to a faint rhythm that seemed to echo from another place entirely. The pain faded, as did the constraints of her physical form. What remained was her mind, vast, free, and floating in a space that felt infinite, yet intimately familiar. And then there was the voice. It wasn't a voice in the conventional sense, but more of a presence. It filled her thoughts, flooded her with an understanding that transcended language. It wasn't just a single entity speaking to her. It was as if she were tapping into a consciousness that stretched across the cosmos itself, a vast web of interconnected minds, civilizations, and beings, each one contributing to the greater whole. The being or beings did not reveal themselves physically. There were no forms, no faces to be seen. Yet, the connection was undeniable. Clara felt as though she had become part of something far larger than herself, a part of the galactic mind. Through their communication, she understood things that defied logic, secrets of the universe, the interconnectedness of all life, the energy that flowed through stars and galaxies, and how each living being, no matter how small, played a role in the grand design. Time, as she knew it, ceased to exist. There was no past or future, only the eternal now. She saw the birth of stars, and the destruction of worlds, the quiet whispers of planets teeming with life and the silent voids where no life could survive. But it wasn't just knowledge she gained. It was a feeling, an overwhelming sense of unity with everything. She knew, in that moment, that there was no separation between her and the distant galaxies, between her and the beings that populated them. All life, all consciousness, was part of the same cosmic dance. When Clara's vision finally began to fade, she was left with an overwhelming sense of peace, an understanding that she had been part of something extraordinary. As her body regained its awareness and the world around her came into focus again, she was no longer the same. The knowledge she had gained still pulsed within her, a secret hidden deep in her soul. What she had experienced was something humanity had not yet comprehended. Could it be possible that we are all connected to something far beyond our understanding? Could this vast galactic mind be reaching out, waiting for us to awaken to the truth of our place in the universe? The questions haunted Clara long after she recovered from her illness. She knew one thing for certain. Whatever she had touched, whatever she had learned, humanity's future was forever intertwined with the secrets of the stars. Every year, on the same night, the people of Turlock County would look up to the sky and see it, the green light. At first, it was a mere curiosity, a streak across the sky that sparked whispers among the locals. Some said it was a meteor, others believed it was some strange weather phenomenon. But as the years passed, the frequency of its appearance coincided with a string of eerie disappearances. People would vanish, without a trace, always when the green light appeared in the night sky. It was in the early hours of one such night that the town's residents gathered. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, a collective shiver running through the group. The green light was unmistakable as it pierced the dark sky, cutting through the blackness like a blade. It was always the same, brilliant, glowing, and unlike anything natural. One by one, the townspeople began to recount their experiences. Old Tom, a farmer who had lived in the area for nearly 50 years, spoke of the night his brother had disappeared. "It was the light," he said, his voice low. "We saw it rise up over the mountains, and the next day, my brother was gone. We searched for days, but there was nothing, no sign of him, just like everyone else." Tom wasn't the only one. Nearly a dozen people had stories of loved ones or friends who had vanished on that night, their disappearances always tied to the green light. The pattern was impossible to ignore, and now, after years of suspicion, the town was determined to uncover the truth. A local group of amateur investigators, mostly curious townsfolk, decided to venture out to the clearing where the light had been sighted most frequently. Equipped with cameras, night vision goggles, and a handful of other tools, they set up their stakeout. As the green light appeared again that evening, they watched in awe as it hovered silently above the treetops. But what happened next was more than any of them could have expected. Without warning, a figure emerged from the glow. It was humanoid in shape, tall, and dressed in a sleek, shimmering suit that reflected the light. They stood motionless for a long moment, their eyes glowing faintly, before they began to move toward the group. The investigators watched in stunned silence, unable to tear their eyes away from the scene. The figure did not speak, but the air around them buzzed with a strange energy. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the figure vanished into the night. The green light dimmed and disappeared. The investigation didn't stop there. The next day, the group of townsfolk gathered again, this time with a new understanding. The disappearances, the light, it was all part of something much larger. The truth that had been buried for so long finally came to light. The green light was not a random occurrence. It was a signal, a kind of alien surveillance system, and those who had disappeared weren't lost. They had been taken. It seemed the small town had been under constant observation, watched by beings whose intentions were still unclear, but whose presence had been known for decades. The green light was not a coincidence. It was part of a hidden agenda. And the town of Turlock County was only a small piece of a much greater puzzle, one that would continue to unfold year after year as the green light appeared once again. It started with the new students. At first, they were just like any other kids, quiet, polite, but there was something off about them. They were brilliant, far beyond their years. Little Sophie, only 7, could solve advanced calculus problems with ease. Marcus, a shy 12-year-old, could recite entire books of history as though he'd lived through them. Their teachers were both amazed and unnerved by how quickly they excelled in subjects far more complex than what they were supposed to understand. Mrs. Henderson, a veteran teacher with over 20 years in the classroom, took a particular interest in one of these children, a girl named Eva. Eva was small for her age, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. She often stood at the window, staring outside for long periods, as though waiting for something. Her speech was formal, almost mechanical, but she spoke with a maturity that was unsettling. One afternoon, as the class settled in for reading time, Mrs. Henderson noticed Eva absent-mindedly sketching in her notebook. The images were strange shapes that didn't quite make sense, geometric patterns that seemed to fold in on themselves, and symbols that Mrs. Henderson couldn't recognize. She gently asked Eva about the drawings. Eva didn't look up from her page but answered in her soft, steady voice. "They are maps. They are for finding us." Mrs. Henderson was taken aback. "Finding you?" she repeated, unsure of how to respond. Eva smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "We are already here." Mrs. Henderson had always been curious, always hungry for knowledge, but this was something different. Later that night, she found herself lying awake, replaying the conversation. What did Eva mean by finding us? And who was us? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Mrs. Henderson began digging into the background of her students, specifically the ones who seemed the most extraordinary. She combed through their files, their birth records, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The more she searched, the more a sinking feeling grew in her gut. It was as if these children had appeared out of nowhere. They had no known relatives, no clear origins. Her investigation led her to an old, forgotten report from the local hospital, a strange admission recorded for a group of children, each one with anomalies in their blood chemistry. The report referenced a government project, one that had been quietly shut down years ago. The details were vague, but one sentence stood out: children born of an off-world origin brought to Earth for observation and integration into society. The pieces clicked together with a horrifying clarity. These children weren't from here. They had been sent to learn from humanity, to observe us closely, and to blend in. But what was their true purpose? Were they studying us for something more than education? As Mrs. Henderson lay awake that night, she looked out the window and saw the distant glow of lights, faint but unmistakable, hovering just beyond the horizon. The children were watching, but now, it seemed, they were waiting. The expedition was supposed to be just another routine dig, a simple project aimed at studying geological layers deep beneath the Earth's surface. But when Dr. Michael Grant's team unearthed the strange object, they knew almost immediately that they had stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding. The artifact lay encased in layers of ancient rock, as though it had been deliberately placed there, hidden for eons. It was unlike anything any of the scientists had ever seen, smooth, metallic, and perfectly symmetrical, with no signs of natural erosion. The object's surface shimmered in a way that defied explanation, reflecting the harsh light of their excavation tools as if it were alive, almost as though it had its own pulse. At first, they thought it might be a geological anomaly, a rare meteorite or a long-forgotten piece of human-made technology. But there were no markings, no familiar designs, nothing to suggest it was of earthly origin. Dr. Grant stood over the artifact, his mind racing. This was no ordinary discovery. The team was no longer studying the Earth's crust. They were uncovering evidence that the planet had been visited long before humanity's rise. But who had left it there? And why? The artifact was taken back to their lab, and the team began the painstaking process of analysis. They carefully scanned its surface with advanced imaging equipment and subjected it to a variety of tests. But the results were always the same. The material didn't match anything found in the periodic table, and the object seemed to emit a faint, rhythmic pulse that wasn't detectable by normal instruments. More disturbingly, the artifact's age was impossible to determine using standard methods. It was older than the Earth itself, older than even the first glimmers of life. Days turned into weeks, and the team's obsession with the artifact grew. As they dug deeper into their research, they uncovered further evidence that it had been buried for millennia, hidden beneath layers of earth, untouched by time. The implications were staggering. If the object predated human civilization, it suggested that extraterrestrial beings had visited Earth long before our ancestors even evolved. But what did that mean? How could this artifact exist without any record or trace of its origin? Then, as the team continued to investigate, they found something far more disturbing. Within the interior of the object, there were faint markings, symbols, lines, and shapes that appeared to form a language. At first, they thought it was a coincidence, just natural patterns. But after careful study, they realized the truth. The markings were deliberate, and they appeared to tell a story of a time when beings from the stars had come to Earth, not as visitors, but as caretakers. They had come long before humanity, and they had left behind their technology, hidden away beneath the soil, waiting for someone to find it. Dr. Grant's heart raced as he processed the information. This discovery was far greater than he had ever imagined, but as the realization set in, a chilling thought crept into his mind. What if they had been watching all along? The sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged peaks of the mountains when Mark, Clara, and Lucas stumbled upon it. They had set out on what was supposed to be a routine hiking trip through the remote trails, a few days of escape from the bustle of city life. But now, standing at the edge of a narrow ridge, their eyes were locked on something that made their hearts pound in disbelief. There, half buried in the rocky ground, was a massive structure that appeared to be made of metal, covered in moss and centuries of dirt. At first glance, it looked like a ship. No, a craft of some kind, but unlike anything they had ever seen. It didn't resemble any modern technology, nor did it look like any relic of the past. The shape was both sleek and worn, an unsettling mix of geometric lines and curves that seemed impossibly advanced for anything from Earth. The metal had a dull, almost iridescent sheen, but it was scarred, pitted with the ravages of time. They approached slowly, the air thick with an eerie silence, the wind not daring to blow as if holding its breath. Clara, the most curious of the group, reached out to touch the surface of the craft. Her fingers brushed against the cold, smooth metal, and as soon as she made contact, a low hum vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. They all froze. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. The hum grew louder, then faded, as if the craft itself had come alive, responding to their presence. Clara pulled her hand back quickly, and the group stepped back, instinctively drawn to the unsettling unknown before them. "There's something off about this," Lucas said, his voice barely audible. "This shouldn't be here." As the three stood in stunned silence, their minds struggled to process what they were seeing. This was no ordinary discovery. It was something far more ancient, something that defied their understanding of history and technology. The craft was not merely a relic. It felt like a tomb, a lost fragment of a civilization long extinct. They began to explore its exterior, trying to make sense of what they were looking at. The craft seemed to be partially buried in the mountainside, as though it had crashed or been placed there long ago. As they moved around it, they found what looked like a door, its surface lined with strange markings that didn't resemble any known language. The door, despite its age, showed no signs of decay, no rust or corrosion. It was as though it had been preserved intentionally, waiting for someone or something to unlock its secrets. A sudden, sharp noise shattered the stillness. A crackling sound, like static, coming from within the ship. Before they could react, the ground beneath them trembled, and a soft light began to glow from inside the craft, casting long shadows across the craggy rocks. "Do you think it's still functional?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. None of them answered. They stood there, mesmerized and terrified, as the ancient craft seemed to beckon them forward, as if it had been waiting for them all along. What they were about to uncover in these desolate mountains, they had no way of knowing, but deep down, they all sensed that they were standing on the brink of something far more terrifying than a simple hike. The fire crackled softly as Daniel's voice lowered, his eyes fixed on the glowing embers. He had been quiet all night, sitting apart from the others, lost in thought. When the others noticed his silence, they asked if he had a story to share. At first, he hesitated. Then he began speaking, his words slow and measured, as if carefully weighing each one. "I don't know where to start, but I'll tell you this. What happened to me is something no one will believe, not unless they've experienced it themselves." His gaze met theirs, and for a moment, he seemed to drift away, his mind far beyond the campfire. "It started when I was out hiking, up in the hills near my home. It was late, the kind of twilight where the sky is bruised purple and the world feels still. I had been out for hours, just walking, trying to clear my head. That's when I saw them." The group leaned in, eyes wide with curiosity. They didn't land, not like you'd think. No flashing lights or thunderous sounds. They just appeared. In front of me, standing on the path, these tall figures, not quite human. Their skin shimmered like it was almost metallic, but not. And their eyes, God, their eyes were black, infinite black, but they were full of knowledge. They weren't here to hurt me. They just stood there, silent, waiting. Daniel paused, his voice faltering for a second, as if the memory was too much to bear. "They communicated with me, but not with words. It was like they were speaking directly into my mind. They showed me things, visions of Earth, of the future, cities burning, skies choked with smoke, people running in panic. And in the center of it all, there was a dark, swirling shape, an alien vessel, something unlike anything we've seen. It was hovering over a ruined world. They told me it was us, our future. If nothing changed, that would be our fate." The group sat in stunned silence, the weight of Daniel's words settling over them. "They told me that I had to stop it," he continued, his eyes haunted, "that there was a point in history, something small, something that seemed insignificant, but if it wasn't altered, the disaster would happen. They didn't say what it was, but they made it clear. I was supposed to change things, to make sure the course of humanity didn't lead to that place." Daniel shook his head, as though trying to shake off the memories that were too heavy to carry. "They warned me that the intervention wouldn't be easy. The changes would ripple, and not everyone would understand. But the alternative was this. I never asked for it, but they said I had no choice. I had to be the one to stop it." The flames crackled loudly in the silence, but no one spoke. Daniel's words hung in the air, an unanswered question for all who had heard them. He met their eyes one last time, the desperation in his voice clear as he added, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I know they weren't lying. That future, it's coming, and I'm the only one who knows how to stop it." The fire flickered and cast dancing shadows across the faces of those gathered around it. Mark had been silent for most of the night, a man of few words. But tonight, something about the crackling embers seemed to stir memories long buried. He had been an astronaut once, one of the few who had traveled beyond Earth's atmosphere to explore the deep void of space. The others knew him as a quiet man, not one to boast about the past, but when he spoke, everyone listened. "It's funny," he began, his voice low, almost lost to the wind. "How you think you know everything about the universe until you're the one staring at it up close. You think the moon is just a rock in the sky, a cold, silent witness to Earth's history. But let me tell you something, I saw things up there, things that shouldn't exist." He paused, his eyes distant, as if searching for the right words. "It was during my mission, back when NASA still had people on the moon. They sent us up there, to the far side, to check for signs of any anomalies, anything that could be affecting the lunar surface. The far side, the one we can't see from Earth. You all know the stories, right? About the mysterious craters, the strange radio silence. I thought it was all a myth, just space stories for the conspiracy theorists. But I was wrong." Mark leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped tightly around his knees. "We found something. At first, it was just a blip, a strange reading in one of the craters. Then another, and another. Someone was there. The craters weren't natural, not like the ones we've studied. These were too precise, too ordered, and there were structures beneath the surface. Ancient, metallic-looking formations buried deep in the regolith." He glanced around at the faces watching him, their eyes wide, some unsure whether they should believe. The team was instructed to ignore it, to leave it alone. But when I got close enough, I could see there were markings on the surface, designs that didn't match anything we had on Earth. And the technology, the instruments we had on board, they weren't picking up anything we could identify. It was like the structures were hiding from us, cloaking themselves. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as the firelight flickered in his eyes. I knew then the truth was bigger than anything we had been told. NASA had been covering it up, hiding the findings. They didn't want the public to know. They didn't want anyone to start asking the right questions. But I know what I saw up there, and I'll never forget it. Mark stared into the fire, his voice barely a whisper. The moon isn't just a satellite. It's a witness, a guardian, and maybe something more. What we think we know about it is nothing compared to the secrets it holds. And now, I'm not sure if we're meant to uncover them. The night was still. The kind of stillness that seemed to swallow every sound except for the occasional crackle of the fire and the rustling of leaves as the wind brushed through the trees. The group sat in a loose circle, wrapped in the warm glow of the firelight, each person lost in their own thoughts. It had been a perfect camping trip up until that point, peaceful, quiet, and remote. But something had happened during their second night in the forest that none of them could ever forget. Rachel was the first to speak, her voice softer than usual, as if even now, years later, she could still feel the weight of that night hanging over her. We were just sitting by the fire. No one was drunk, no one was on edge. It was calm. But I swear, I saw something in the trees. The others shifted in their seats, leaning in as she continued. At first, I thought it was just an animal, some deer or maybe a bear. But then I realized it wasn't moving like anything I'd ever seen. It was just standing there, at the edge of the trees, watching us, silent, still, almost like it was waiting for something. The group fell silent. The only sound now was the crackling of the fire. Rachel took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. We all saw it, eventually. At least, I think we all did. But none of us said anything. Not at first. We just watched it standing there, no movement, no sound. Just watching. John, who had been quiet up until then, nodded slowly. I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I remember trying to convince myself it was just a shadow or a trick of the firelight. But it didn't move. Not at all. We watched for what felt like hours, and then, out of nowhere, it just disappeared into the trees without a sound. We didn't talk about it much after that, Rachel continued. The rest of the night was awkward. We didn't sleep much, but nothing happened. The next day, it was like it had never happened. But it wasn't until years later, after the trip had long faded into their past, that they learned the truth. Rachel had come across an article, buried deep in a corner of the internet, detailing strange reports from campers in that same remote area. Other hikers, other groups, had witnessed the same silent figures, standing motionless in the trees, observing them. It was then that the realization hit them all at once. They hadn't just been watched by something or someone, they had been studied. The figures in the trees weren't just curious. They were extraterrestrial. Observers, silent and calculating, gathering information. And they had been silently observing the campers that night, just as they had done countless others. The truth was terrifying, not because of what had happened in the forest, but because it was clear now they had never truly been alone. The wind howled through the mountains that night, rattling the windows of the observatory. Jonathan had been the night watchman at the remote observatory for years, and he had grown accustomed to the isolation and eerie quiet of the place. But that night, there was something different, something he couldn't shake off. Even now, so many years later, he sat at his desk, surrounded by the hum of computers and the flicker of the monitoring screens, scanning the sky. The observatory's location, high in the mountains, far from any city lights, made it the perfect spot for stargazing, but it also meant he was the only person for miles around. Most nights, it was peaceful, just him and the stars, but on that night, something pulled his attention away from the telescope. It was the sound of silence, so profound it seemed unnatural. No birds, no insects, no rustling of the trees, just a deep, unsettling quiet. Jonathan glanced up from his desk and stared out the large window, his heart sinking. In the distance, hovering motionless in the sky, was a craft. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a dark, triangular shape with a faint, eerie glow along its edges. It wasn't making a sound, just floating there in the vast, black sky, suspended with an unnatural stillness. He rubbed his eyes, convinced that the exhaustion of the night shift was playing tricks on him. But when he opened them again, the craft was still there. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just hung there, watching. Jonathan tried to convince himself it was some sort of experimental aircraft from a nearby government facility, but deep down, he knew better. As he sat there, staring, figures began to emerge in the craft. They were barely visible, silhouetted against the soft glow of the craft's edges. They seemed to be watching him, though they didn't move or react in any way. Jonathan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The figures were not human, he could feel it. They were taller, their proportions wrong in a way that unsettled him. They stood still, silent, unmoving, and their gaze seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. He had no idea how long the craft hovered there. It felt like hours, but when Jonathan checked the clock, only a few minutes had passed. When he finally gathered the courage to leave the observatory and step outside, the craft was gone, vanished without a trace. The sky was as empty and silent as it had been before. The experience stayed with him, gnawing at him for days. There had been no communication, no signs of aggression, but the weight of those figures, silently watching from above, left an imprint on his mind that he couldn't erase. What had they wanted? Why had they been watching, and why him? The questions lingered long after, unanswered, as if the craft had never really been there at all, except Jonathan knew better. Something had watched him that night, and they hadn't been human. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching, always watching. It was a crisp evening when Daniel decided to take his usual solitary walk through the dense forest that bordered his property. The cool air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, and the rustling of leaves underfoot was the only sound that accompanied his thoughts. He had always found solace in the quiet solitude of the woods, a place where time seemed to slow down, and the outside world faded away. But on that night, something was different. As Daniel wandered deeper into the forest, a strange stillness fell over the landscape. Even the wind, which usually whispered through the trees, had fallen silent. The moon, barely a sliver in the sky, cast an eerie, silver glow on the ground. It felt as if the world around him had paused, waiting. And then, he saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker of light between the trees, but as he moved closer, the shape began to materialize. It was tall and slender, standing unnaturally still in the clearing ahead of him. Its skin shimmered in the dim light, a pale, iridescent hue that seemed to shift as if made of liquid. Its eyes were the most striking, large, dark, and deep, like endless pools of black that seemed to draw him in. Daniel froze, heart pounding in his chest, but somehow he wasn't afraid. There was a calmness about the being, an unspoken understanding that it wasn't there to harm him. The air between them felt thick with anticipation, as if the space itself was holding its breath. Without a word, the being reached out, and Daniel felt a sharp pull in his mind. Suddenly, his surroundings blurred, and his vision was filled with vivid, disjointed images, fractured glimpses of distant stars, strange landscapes, and glowing symbols. He recognized none of it, but it felt familiar. A voice, not spoken aloud, but heard within his mind, echoed softly. "I have watched this world for many cycles. Your kind, your planet. I have seen it grow and falter. You do not realize the path you walk, but I have learned your language through your dreams, through your visions. And now I must speak." Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the words flooded his mind, overwhelming him with their weight. "You are on the edge, standing at a precipice you cannot see. A great darkness comes, one that will undo all you have built. But it is not fate that has brought you here. It is choice. Your choices have led to this moment. And yet, there is still time, a shift, a change. You can alter the course, but only if you listen." The images in his mind twisted, showing a future full of destruction and despair, followed by glimpses of hope, small, flickering moments of light that could be nurtured, if only humanity could change its course. "I cannot save you," the voice whispered, "but you can save yourselves." The vision faded, and the being before him seemed to dissolve into the air, vanishing as quietly as it had appeared. The forest was silent again, and Daniel was left standing alone in the clearing, his heart racing, his mind racing even faster. He had no answers, only questions. But the one thing he knew for sure was that the warning was real. Whatever had just happened, whatever message had been shared, would change everything. If humanity was to survive, the time for change was now, or it would be too late. The deep blue of the ocean stretched endlessly before them, a vast, silent expanse that seemed to swallow all sound. The divers, experienced and confident in their skills, had come to this remote part of the world in search of rare marine life. But the farther they descended, the more they felt a strange pull, a sense that they were heading towards something unknown. As they neared the ocean floor, the water grew colder, and the visibility began to shrink. Their lights cut through the murkiness, revealing strange shapes in the distance. At first, they thought it was just an underwater rock formation, something they had encountered countless times before. But as they drew closer, the shapes began to take form, unmistakable against the backdrop of the ocean floor. There, hidden among the dark rocks, was something neither of them had ever seen before. It was a structure, not natural, but unmistakably constructed. Smooth, metallic surfaces gleamed in the glow of their lights, and strange symbols, alien in nature, were etched into the surface. The divers exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what they had found. Their minds raced to comprehend the impossible sight before them. They cautiously explored the structure, moving along its edges, carefully examining every detail. The walls of the base were composed of a material unlike anything they had ever encountered, far stronger and more durable than any human technology. It was as if the metal had been forged under conditions that defied known physics. Their equipment struggled to scan the surface, and what little data they managed to collect was corrupted, as though something was actively blocking their attempts to understand it. The base itself seemed vast, stretching out farther than the divers could comprehend. The corridors were empty, save for an eerie hum that reverberated through the walls. There were no signs of life, but the unmistakable presence of technology hummed around them. Large, circular doors led to rooms they could not enter, sealed tight, as though the base had been abandoned long ago, but the technology was still active, pulsing with power. As they ventured deeper, they stumbled upon a room unlike the others. It was filled with large, cylindrical containers, each one filled with a thick, viscous liquid. Inside each container, something moved. At first, they thought it was just the currents of the ocean, but then they realized that what lay inside was far more than just marine life. The figures were humanoid, their features indistinct but clearly not human. The divers' hearts pounded in their chests as they backed away from the tanks. There was no question in their minds now. This was no simple wreck or forgotten outpost. This was an alien base, one that had been hidden beneath the ocean for millennia, possibly longer. And those containers, they weren't just experiments. They were the evidence of something much more sinister. Why had they been hidden away? What had the extraterrestrials been doing beneath the water all this time? As they made their way back to the surface, their minds were filled with only one thought. They had uncovered a secret that was never meant to be found, a secret that might change the understanding of life on Earth forever. The dusty attic was a treasure trove of forgotten memories, boxes piled high, filled with old family heirlooms and yellowed photographs. For as long as they could remember, Emma had always been drawn to the attic's quiet, forgotten corners, where time seemed to stand still. It was a place where she could almost hear whispers of the past, and today, as she sifted through an old wooden chest, something caught her eye. It was a rolled-up piece of parchment, its edges brittle with age. She unrolled it carefully, the faint smell of old paper filling the air, and her breath caught. The parchment was covered in intricate markings, lines, symbols, and strange notations that seemed to shimmer faintly under the dim light of the attic. She had seen maps before, but nothing like this. This wasn't a map of any country or city she recognized. This was something different. Emma's fingers traced the strange symbols as she studied the map, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the patterns. As her mind worked to decipher the unfamiliar script, a sense of déjà vu washed over her. Something in the back of her mind told her that this map was important, not just a relic of the past, but a key to something far larger. For weeks, Emma obsessed over the map, poring over every detail. She used every tool at her disposal, books, online resources, and even reaching out to experts in ancient languages. Slowly, methodically, she began to decode the symbols. What she found wasn't just a map of the stars, it was a star map, detailing constellations that didn't quite match any known patterns. The lines seemed to connect distant stars, but they didn't lead to just any corner of the universe. The map was pointing to a specific location, somewhere deep within the Earth. As she pieced together the map, Emma began to realize that it wasn't just some ancient stargazer's work. The stars it pointed to weren't random. They were carefully chosen, connected by a hidden thread that led to one singular place on Earth. A place, she now realized, that her family had guarded for generations. A location that, according to the map, might hide an alien artifact. The map wasn't just a guide to the stars, it was a guide to a secret buried right beneath their feet. Her heart raced as she traced the final lines to a remote area of land far from the nearest town. The place marked on the map was isolated, surrounded by dense forest and forgotten by most, a place where few would think to look for anything of importance. With the weight of discovery pressing down on her, Emma knew that she couldn't keep the map a secret. She had to follow it. But what would she find? An alien artifact? Or something else? Something far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. As she gathered the courage to leave, the pull of the map was too strong to ignore. Emma knew one thing for certain: the journey ahead would change everything. The desert stretched endlessly before them, its scorching heat rising from the ground like a shimmering veil. The team of archaeologists had been trekking for days, their water supply dwindling, the horizon offering little more than a promise of endless sand. But this was the moment they had been waiting for. The entrance to the cave was hidden beneath the overhang of jagged rocks, its mouth barely noticeable against the backdrop of the barren landscape. This cave, as ancient as the land itself, had been rumored to hold something extraordinary. Inside, the air was cool and stale, a welcome relief from the desert sun. The light from their flashlights flickered across the cave walls, revealing ancient symbols carved into the stone, their meaning lost to time. The further they ventured in, the more palpable the feeling of something being hidden deep within. Then, at the farthest recess of the cave, they saw it. The artifact was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its smooth, metallic surface gleamed even in the dim light, as though it absorbed the very essence of energy around it. The object was large, roughly the size of a human torso, but its shape was alien, too symmetrical, too perfect to be a natural formation. A soft, rhythmic hum emanated from it, vibrating through the stone floor and into their bones. The team stood frozen for a moment, as if the very presence of the artifact commanded their awe. Dr. Sarah Whitmore, the lead archaeologist, was the first to step forward, her breath shallow with excitement and trepidation. "This isn't just a relic," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "This is something more." The artifact seemed to respond to her presence, the hum growing louder, more distinct. It almost felt as though it was alive, pulsating with an energy that defied all human understanding. The team began their examination carefully, documenting every detail, their scientific instruments whirring to life as they measured the object's temperature, density, and electromagnetic fields. Nothing they did seemed to make sense. The artifact emitted energy beyond their comprehension, its composition unknown to human science. The cave felt unnervingly still, as if the walls themselves were watching. As Sarah touched the surface of the artifact, a sudden surge of energy jolted through her, a vision flashing in her mind. Images of vast star systems, strange alien cities, and beings that hovered in the sky with unearthly grace flickered like fragments of a dream. Her heart raced as the images burned into her mind, an overwhelming flood of information that made her feel both enlightened and terrified. When the vision faded, she pulled her hand back in shock, her body trembling. She turned to the others, her voice barely above a whisper. This is not from here. This is the key to everything." As the team continued their investigation, it became clear. The artifact wasn't just a relic from an alien civilization. It was a message, one that had been hidden on Earth for millennia, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. A message that spoke of ancient interactions with extraterrestrial beings, and perhaps a warning about the future of humanity. In that cave, amidst the endless desert, they had found more than just an artifact. They had found a doorway to understanding Earth's place in the vast cosmos, a doorway that had been sealed for too long. The room was dimly lit, the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A man sat across from a small table, his hands trembling slightly as he opened a thick file, its edges worn from years of secrecy. His face was shadowed, but the weight of the moment was clear in his eyes that had seen too much to ever be the same again. His name had been scrubbed from the records, a man lost in the bureaucracy, but his knowledge was undeniable. He had once worked in a facility so secret that even the walls seemed to whisper warnings. "You have to understand," he began, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. This wasn't something that happened overnight. The government knew. They knew about the aliens, and they've been keeping it from you for decades. He pushed the file forward, a stack of documents that seemed like nothing more than papers to the casual observer. But these papers were the key to a hidden truth, buried so deep that no one outside certain circles had ever dared to acknowledge it. Photographs, testimonies, and detailed records filled the pages, evidence of encounters with extraterrestrial beings that stretched back to the earliest days of space exploration. Some of the photos were grainy, others clearer than any civilian footage. There were images of strange crafts hovering over military installations, of beings unlike anything human. They had been documented in classified files, locked away in the vaults of the world's most powerful agencies. These files, he continued, voice thick with regret, contain everything. There are records of UFO sightings that date back to the 1940s. We weren't just observing them, we were interacting with them. There are documents detailing first-hand encounters with extraterrestrials, beings who communicated with us in ways we still don't fully understand. He flipped through the papers, stopping on one photograph, a blurry shot of a craft. But the unmistakable shape and size were there, a perfect match for the sightings described by those who had worked with the government. Another photograph showed an alien figure, its elongated limbs and glowing eyes captured under the harsh light of a secure facility. "There's testimony here," he said, pointing to a thick document. "I saw it with my own eyes. They came to us, offered us technology, and even warned us about our path. They were monitoring us, trying to guide us, but they stopped. And we, in turn, stopped listening." The man's fingers traced the pages slowly, as though he feared touching them too roughly might erase the truth forever. "The world doesn't know this, but these beings were here, are still here, and what we've been told, what we've been led to believe, was just part of the cover-up. All those sightings, all those encounters, they were real." He leaned forward, the weight of his words sinking in like a heavy stone. "The files exist, they've been hidden away. And the truth, they're terrified of the truth getting out. It could change everything, the way we see ourselves, the way we understand our place in the universe." He stood up, glancing over his shoulder nervously, the papers now safely tucked under his arm. "If you want to know the truth, you have to find the files. They're out there, locked away in places you'll never think to look." And with that, he was gone. The truth, for now, remained hidden in the pages of forgotten records, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. The hum of the lab was punctuated by the steady clicking of keyboards and the quiet murmur of conversations. But then, a different sound broke through a soft beep, distant yet urgent. Dr. Sarah Linton, the lead scientist, paused mid-sentence. Her eyes narrowed as she turned toward the monitor, the signal appearing like an anomaly on the screen. It wasn't supposed to be there. She tapped a few keys, bringing the signal into focus. "Could you check this?" she asked, voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of disbelief. Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Grant, leaned over her shoulder. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the data. "It's not a glitch, Sarah. This is real." The signal was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. It wasn't random static or background noise. It was structured, rhythmic, almost purposeful. It echoed across frequencies in a pattern that felt deliberate, as though the signal was trying to communicate, not just be heard. "Where's it coming from?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she was afraid to press any further. Marcus clicked through a series of diagnostic tools. "It's originating from a distant galaxy about 30 light-years away. Too far for any human-made technology to reach. But the patterns." He glanced at Sarah, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "It's as if it's organized, like a code." A moment of silence passed between them, the weight of the discovery settling in the room. The implications were staggering. Could this be the moment they had been waiting for, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth? The team worked through the night, running simulations, reanalyzing the data. The signal repeated at regular intervals, each transmission carrying with it a slightly altered pattern, as if it was evolving. It felt too intricate, too purposeful to be a natural occurrence. Yet nothing in their vast database of known cosmic phenomena matched the frequency or structure. By morning, they had enough data to make a tentative conclusion. This wasn't random. This wasn't just space noise. This was something far more extraordinary. A message, a beacon. The signal seemed to be answering a question they hadn't even asked yet. Sarah rubbed her eyes, her exhaustion evident, but her mind was racing. What if it's not just a message? What if it's an invitation? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the screen. If it is an invitation, then we have a choice to make. Do we answer it? Do we send a reply? The decision weighed heavily on them, and they both knew there was no turning back. They had uncovered something beyond their understanding, and now the question was no longer just about science. It was about who or what was reaching out, and what message they were trying to convey. As the signal pulsed again, a chill ran through Sarah's spine. They had only just begun to decipher its meaning, but already she could sense that the answers might be far more profound than they had ever imagined. It started as an odd rumor in a small town, barely a whisper among the locals. But as the months passed, more and more people began to share their strange experiences. A glowing trail, stretching across the night sky like a ribbon of light, would appear without warning, vanishing just as mysteriously. The phenomenon became known as the Alien Highway. One evening, a group of friends gathered at the edge of a field, looking up at the vast expanse above them. The stars were bright, the moon a sliver in the distance. They had heard the stories, but none of them truly believed, at least, not until they saw it for themselves. It started with a faint light in the sky, distant at first, like a star. But then, it began to grow, moving silently, faster than any known aircraft. It wasn't like a shooting star or a plane. No, this was something different. The light pulsed with an eerie rhythm, almost as if it was alive. The shape of a massive glowing ship became clearer as it crossed the sky. Is that moving?" one of the friends asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They all looked up, stunned. The ship, enormous and silent, passed overhead, leaving behind a trail of light, a luminous path that slowly began to fade but never quite disappeared. It wasn't just a single ship either. After the first one, a second followed, then a third, each moving in perfect sync, as if they were part of some grand procession. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the last ship vanished, leaving the night sky still and quiet once again. The friends sat in stunned silence. None of them could explain what they had just witnessed. What kind of ships were those? Where had they come from? And why had they been so quiet, so deliberate? The stories continued, with more people coming forward, claiming they had seen the same thing. But no one had any answers. Some said it was a military experiment, but that didn't explain the silence or the impossibly fast speeds. Others whispered about extraterrestrial visitors traveling across the universe using some form of technology beyond human comprehension. As the weeks went by, sightings grew more frequent. The Alien Highway became a part of the town's lore, something people talked about but couldn't quite believe. Still, no one could deny the glowing trails that occasionally lit up the night sky. They were unmistakable. The more people tried to make sense of it, the more questions arose. Was this truly an alien highway, a route that connected distant star systems, or was there something else at play, something we had yet to understand? One thing was certain: the ships moved with a purpose, as if following a path known only to them, and perhaps to whoever or whatever was guiding them across the stars. Around the crackling campfire, The storyteller's voice lowered, drawing the group in closer. The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that seemed to amplify every crackle from the fire and every breath from the wind. His eyes gleamed with something unsettling as he began his tale. "There's a being that's been living among us for years, maybe longer. It's not human, though it can look just like one," he said, pausing for effect. The glow of the fire flickered across his face, casting eerie shadows. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've heard too many stories to dismiss it as just wild speculation." He shifted his position, glancing around at the faces in the group. Some seemed intrigued, others skeptical, but everyone was listening intently now. "People call it a shapeshifter," he continued. "It has the ability to change its appearance, its very essence so seamlessly that even the sharpest eyes won't notice. The thing is, you don't always realize something's wrong until it's too late. There's a feeling, something in the air, something in the eyes of the person you're talking to. Something off." The wind seemed to pick up as he spoke, making the flames dance wildly for a moment. He looked at each person, his gaze lingering on them, as if trying to judge their reactions. "I met someone who encountered it, a friend of mine. She said it was at a party, just a normal night. Everything seemed fine until she shook hands with a man who had recently moved into town. The moment they touched, she felt cold. And not just in the way you feel cold when the air shifts, but deep inside, like it was coming from within him, like something was frozen in his core. But she didn't think much of it until she noticed his eyes. Not in a physical sense, his pupils weren't dilated or anything, but something in the way they looked at her, like he knew too much, like he was seeing something beyond what was right in front of him." The storyteller's voice dropped even lower, as if sharing a secret. After that, she felt it, that creeping sense of wrongness. He wasn't human. She couldn't explain it, but she knew. There were others who had similar encounters too. Small moments where people, just ordinary people, didn't act the way they should. There was one woman who said she'd been talking to a man in a cafe, and he started talking about things, about her life, things that he couldn't have known unless he'd been watching her. She said he wasn't quite right. He was too perfect, like a well-rehearsed actor playing a role. The fire crackled again, the sound cutting through the air, thick with tension. "Some people say it's been here for decades, blending in, learning from us. Others say it's part of something much bigger, something we can't even comprehend yet. Maybe it's not the only one." He leaned back, staring into the flames. "But one thing is certain, when you're around them, when you look into their eyes long enough, you'll feel it, that chilling sense that you're no longer speaking to a human, that what you're talking to might not even be from this world." The air seemed colder now, as the fire flickered and the night deepened, leaving the group to wonder how much of their world was truly human. The flames of the campfire flickered against the inky darkness, casting shadows that seemed to dance across the faces of the listeners. The storyteller sat back, his eyes distant, as if he could see beyond the night, beyond the fire, into another time. Long ago, before humanity even understood the stars, Earth was nothing more than a battleground, a place caught in the crossfire of a galactic war, one so ancient that its roots have faded into myth. But there are those survivors, witnesses who know the truth, he began, his voice low, almost reverent. There were two factions, each as old as the stars themselves. One, a race of beings who believed in controlling all worlds, shaping them to their will. The other, a more peaceful but equally determined civilization who wanted to protect the natural order of the universe. For eons, they fought in the shadows, battling over countless planets. But Earth, this little blue world, was the prize they both coveted. The air seemed to grow heavier, the crackling of the fire the only sound as the group leaned in closer, captivated. They arrived in silence, these alien forces, ships cloaked in technology far beyond our understanding. leaving no trace of their presence. But the Earth was never meant to be caught in such a war. Humans, at the time, were still primitive, too innocent to know the stakes. They fought their own petty wars, oblivious to the greater conflict unfolding just beyond their reach. The storyteller continued. Some say the first great civilizations on Earth, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, knew of the war. The gods they worshipped were not gods at all, but the leaders of these factions. They came, disguised as gods, teaching humans how to build and create, manipulating the course of history for their own gain. Some of those ancient tablets, when read in the right light, reveal secrets of strange battles fought in the skies, of weapons that could shatter planets. He paused for a moment, the firelight reflecting off his face, making it hard to tell if he was simply telling a tale or if he believed it to be the truth. But the war didn't stay hidden forever. There was a great battle, one that changed the course of everything. The factions clashed, and Earth was torn apart by their weapons. The sky lit up with colors never seen before, and the Earth trembled beneath the weight of their power. Entire cities were erased from existence, and those who survived were left with nothing but the scars of a war they never understood. The storyteller's voice dropped, as though sharing something deeply personal, something that had been with him for years. Some of the survivors are still out there. They walk among us, their memories clouded by time, but deep down, they know the truth. The war didn't end, it just went underground, hidden from the world. The factions, those ancient beings, continue to watch. They still fight for control of this world. He leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper now. And the question we must all ask ourselves, what if that war is still raging? What if we're still caught in the middle, with no idea who the true enemy is? The fire crackled once more, the shadows deepening, as the group sat in stunned silence, wondering how much of their world was truly theirs, and how much was still claimed by forces they would never understand. The night was still, the air thick with mystery as the storyteller leaned in, his eyes gleaming with excitement. His voice was steady, yet there was an undercurrent of disbelief, as though he still couldn't quite grasp what he had discovered. "I wasn't supposed to find it," he began, the words heavy with weight. "None of us were. We were sent to Mars on a routine mission, tasked with exploring its surface, collecting samples, doing the things we had been trained for. But what we stumbled upon, it changed everything." The fire crackled, and the group leaned in, sensing the gravity of what was to come. "We were digging, excavating a site that had been identified as a possible point of interest. We didn't know what we were looking for, really. Just another artifact, maybe a sign of ancient Martian life. Nothing that would explain the strange signals we had been picking up for months. But when we hit the rock, when the earth trembled beneath our feet, and that hidden chamber opened up, it was like nothing I had ever experienced." The storyteller paused, his breath catching in his throat, as though reliving the moment. "We found a door. It wasn't like anything we had on Earth. The metal was unlike anything in our archives, polished and smooth, with strange symbols etched into its surface. It was clear this wasn't something the Martians had built. It was far older, far more advanced. We didn't understand it at first, but we knew, deep down, that we had found something monumental. It was a library, an alien repository buried beneath Mars, holding the history of the universe." He smiled faintly, a mix of awe and fear in his eyes. "We accessed it, slowly, carefully. The walls were lined with rows and rows of data, ancient texts, holographic records, fragments of knowledge that stretched back to civilizations older than time itself. Each page we uncovered told the story of worlds and races. We could hardly comprehend technologies, philosophies, and histories of alien beings that had long since disappeared into the fabric of time. It was the ultimate treasure trove." The storyteller's voice grew darker, the weight of the revelation settling in. But as we decoded the texts, something strange started to happen. The records weren't just history, they were warnings, warnings about a power, an intelligence that had been sealed away. It was a force so dangerous that entire civilizations had fallen to it, beings who sought knowledge so vast that it consumed them. And the texts, the knowledge we had uncovered, was a key to unlocking something terrible. The flames from the fire flickered, casting strange shadows on his face. At first, we didn't believe it. We thought it was just a tale, a legend left behind by an ancient species. But as we dug deeper into the library's hidden archives, we realized the truth. We had unearthed something far more dangerous than we ever expected. Something that should have remained buried. The storyteller's voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes searching the darkness around him. And now, I wonder, what if it's already too late? What if we've unleashed something we can't contain? The air around the campfire grew heavy as the final storyteller stood, his face barely visible in the flickering light. His voice, low and purposeful, echoed through the still night. "This is the story," he began, "the one that ends all the others. A warning, not from the past, but from the future." The crackling of the fire seemed to pause, as if even the flames knew this was a tale of greater consequence. The group sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing on them, the embers casting long, dancing shadows. It began with a message, a simple signal at least. That's how it seemed at first. A hum, a vibration, something beyond the normal frequencies we were accustomed to. It came from a deep space probe that had been sent to the outer reaches of our solar system. At first, no one knew how to interpret it, but one man, just an ordinary scientist, no different from the rest of us, was the one to crack it. The storyteller paused, his eyes narrowing as if recalling the weight of the discovery. What he found wasn't just a message, it was a warning, a voice, but not one of Earth. The voice spoke in a language no human had ever heard, yet somehow they understood it. And then came the truth. The voice belonged to a race of beings from a future that hadn't yet happened. The group shifted uneasily, the firelight flickering as the story deepened. They told him that Earth's fate had already been decided, that what we thought were natural events, history unfolding in its usual chaotic fashion, were actually part of a much larger plan. Our future had already been written. It all centered around an ancient artifact, one that had been hidden beneath the Earth's surface long before humanity even began to rise. The storyteller's voice lowered to a near whisper. The beings told him that the artifact held a power so immense that if it was ever unlocked, it would reshape the very fabric of existence. And the worst part? It would be activated by the event we least expect, an event that would soon be upon us. The campfire crackled, the heat from the flames rising in the cold air. They said it would happen soon, faster than we think. The event would come from within, not from the stars or otherworldly invaders, but from our own world, from a place we had long forgotten. The artifact would awaken, and with it, the force that would change everything, our future, our reality, even the way we perceive time itself. The silence that followed was thick, and no one dared move. The final storyteller stood motionless, his words hanging in the air like a dark prophecy. "We're running out of time," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "The future, the past, it's all connected, and we've been warned. The message is clear. Humanity must act. But the question is, do we know what's coming, or are we already too late?"